It says we're reviewing today, but don't forget about this homework that's due tonight. And if you haven't finished the last discussion, do that as well. Okay. So where did we leave off last time? So in parts 3 and 4, we were looking at this initial table, which broke down each sandwich by ingredient, and then looked up how many sandwiches were sold to then figure out how many ingredients were used on any given day. Then what was asked of us to do in part 5 was to take those two previous tables and essentially make the 7-day rolling total versions of each. For example, like how many BLTs were sold between the 1st and the 7th, and then the 2nd to the 8th, and so on and so forth. And then the same thing with ingredients. And so you don't really have to do anything special here. Like, all the information you need is in these single day versions. You just need to add together the appropriate group of numbers and drag the correct way to fill out the rest of this table. This one also had like a graph attached, but not really anything too complicated there. Then in the last question of part 5, we had one more of those inventory questions, and it wanted to know, for example, what's the largest number in this row? What's the largest number in that row? All the way down. So we can run the max function on each of those rows to see what the highest demand was across any 7 days, and then compare that against our current inventory to once again figure out how much we should order. Either it's the difference between the two if we don't currently have enough on hand, or it's 0 if we do have enough on hand. And then in part 6, instead of a 7-day rolling total like we have in part 5, it's a 7-day average. So sort of the same thing as before. You can go up here to all of your raw data for any individual day, and let's say like for bacon from the 1st to the 7th, instead of adding these up, you can average these numbers. And that's why we get a whole bunch of decimals in this particular table, because we're essentially dividing by 7 and gives us those numbers. Then, last of all, there is one more question in part 6 that wanted us to make one of these graphs comparing the average 7-day total to the actual daily use. And so what we're doing for any given ingredient is comparing the second table we built using matrix multiplication to this table we just built in part 6. And the only thing I want to point out there is that, when you're trying to pick a number for the 7 days from the 1st to the 7th, well, obviously you're using this column for the average number. But if you go back up to the 1-day ingredient, it's not entirely obvious, which of these two columns you're using. Are you using the 1st or using the 7th? In that case, they want you to use the end date of that 7-day stretch. So make sure that this column, the July 7th column, is actually the first number that you compare it against. Otherwise, your graph is sort of shifted by 7 days. And then you can just highlight all this stuff and you should get a graph that looks like that. And it's pretty easy to see which one's the average, which I think is like the first question in the workbook. Even though mine is labeled. The average always is the one that's sort of slicing through the middle of the other guy. So that's what we're doing in part 6.